Greetings, people who are still trying to answer the question, how many accordion lovers does it take to change a light bulb? So as you probably already know, I failed. I tried to devise the ultimate scale chord system, and I failed. And I tried to integrate my theoretical perfect chord into my already existing chord system. It's in my book, okay? So you know that. I failed. But during those failures, I discovered and received ideas from the unconscious, and I got a whole bunch of new stuff. All right, they're not complete systems, but I got a lot of good stuff. And in the past few videos, especially lately, I've been trying to take you through the exact process that I went through to get to where I'm at. It might be boring, might be a little weird, and it's drawn out, but it was very fun. It was a very fun experience, and I'm sharing that. So I got to the point where I received the idea of the amplified circle of fifths. All right, you've heard that many times, and you've seen the circle, right? And I'm taking you step by step through the process. I know you've been incredibly patient. I showed how we first focused on taking a few chords, taking those chord tones and mapping out a scale, and I featured the tone G. I showed how you can find the tones for the G major scale here, and then here you can find the tones for the G natural minor here, and then here in this setup you can, by taking the tones of the diminished chords here, you can get a selection of tones from which you can take out your G blues scale. So I featured G, but what happened during this process over the years, I discovered that we might possibly have things I call scale shapes, okay? It's shapes on your circle of fifth that designate and show you scales, all right? So I talked about that, and we moved forward, and I made these smaller so I can get them closer to the phone, how we can form a scale. Here's your C major scale, which would be the Ionian mode of C, and I used a rectangular graph to make it easier for your mind to understand, and I showed you that we had a scale shape. Then the next one would be the C minor scale, right? Scale shape. Then we had a second scale shape when we got to the C minor 2 scale, which would be the Phrygian mode of A flat major. Okay, we talked about that. And then we went through this chart thing. I'm doing this individually here. Each one's individual, just to give you a quick idea what we already talked about. And then finally the 7th mode. Now, the thing I wanted to tell you is, I told you last time in the last video that we're only now getting into the beautiful stuff, all right? Only now. And I told you in the last video that when we mapped out our scales and modes that use the C as your tonic, the tone C, I said that we had 3 scale shapes, all right? Well, actually, the beautiful thing is you don't need 3. You can narrow it down to 2. And I didn't show you this because my charts were getting cluttered. They were getting so cluttered. You see, when you look at this amplified circle of fifths, you see the slices get smaller, so it has a sense of being constricted. So now I want to show you something. Here's your C major scale, all right, number 1. And you have a scale shape here in green. Right? Now your second scale would be your C minor scale. Right? See that C minor? Now look at that shape. That's the C minor scale. And here's the C major scale, right here in the green. And here's the C minor 3. That would be your natural minor. That's what you'd probably call it. But look at that. We have one scale shape. Now, when I talk about clutter, what I'm saying is, you see this scale shape here, this one would actually fit in here. So you could draw it in there, but it would be a mess and you wouldn't be able to see it clearly. See, you wouldn't be able to see it. This is my problem with low technology. Now see, it's the same scale shape, all right? But I have to draw them on a separate piece of paper. Otherwise it would be way too cluttered. But what the whole point is, for this particular scale shape, all you do is take one scale shape and you can shift it down and then shift it down, and you get 3 scales or 3 modes built basically with the C tonic as your sole tonic, your C. I'll explain that later. But that's one of the scale shapes. So I narrowed it down to 2. But to make it clear, I have to keep drawing these charts. That's the problem. So here's a scale shape. Here's your C minor 2 scale. All right. You see that shape? And you just take that shape and you move it over like this, and you get another scale. C major minor. Now these are my names from my system. We'll talk about that later, but they're scales that you've probably seen before. Now you need another piece of paper to show the other same scale shapes. This is why I showed you 3 before. So we wouldn't have to cram them all in on one paper. Now I'm just going to do this. I'm going to show you this. Here's a C augmented scale and the scale shape. All right, and here's the C minor 2 augmented, and you see it's the same thing. You just go like that, you move them, you slide them, and you get another scale that fits into that scheme. Now you see here, you see this one here, you can slide down to get this, and you see we cannot draw these on the same paper as these, or it would just be a jumbled up mess. So I have to show you 2 different papers. But if I do that, you might actually get an idea of how I condensed the scale shapes down to 2. The only problem is without a computer program, so you see I have to draw them out by hand. You see, you can't superimpose these over these. You just get a clustered mess. So I'm showing you on 2 different papers that they are actually the same scale shape. All right? So we did that. We did the C major scale. It went pretty well. And then I tried to say, well, what does this have to do with modes? So I tried to explain. This is very difficult, especially for a non-teacher. I'm a non-teacher. I don't have an education, so I have to use my grassroots kind of method to explain things. So I call them mode perspectives. If you want to make modes, there's 2 ways to approach it. You can use the single scale derived approach, where you derive modes from a single major scale, or any scale for that matter. All right, and the other thing is the single tone form. It's another perspective. Single tone form, all right, and we'll talk about that. Whereas we draw up our modes and we use only one tonic. And then we take modes, but we're using only one tonic. Now, when I showed you my mode names, I showed you the traditional names, which you're familiar with, and I made up my own names for the 7 modes made on or from the minor major scale. And you would call this the melodic minor. That's what you would call it. This is what I call it in my system. Now, these names I chose specifically because they're Byzantine derived, from the Byzantine period. You see, right in here is when what they call the Byzantine period, or the Byzantine Empire. All right, so I chose names that are concordant with the old Byzantine names. That's why I showed you that. These I call the Glarian, because of Heinrich Glarian. He did a lot of work on this and made it nice and sweet. And these are the post-Glarian modes, I call them. They're a little bit more modern. So now you understand that a little bit better. And another key feature that's very important to know is when you talk about mode perspectives, all right? Modes derived from a single scale. Now I talked about that yesterday. If you have, as an example, a G major scale, all right, here's your tones, and you make modes starting on this tone, all right, you'd get your Ionian mode, and that would be a G major scale. That would be your correlated scale. If you started your mode on A, all right, you'd have your Dorian mode, and that would be called A minor. That's your correlated scale, A minor. That's what you'd get. That's what the net result would be, etc., etc. So I talked about that. All right. Now, it's plain to this point that it should be plain to the viewer that we have 7 modes that we can be built on or from a major scale. I just showed that. And then also there's 7 modes that can be built on or from the melodic minor scale, the traditional melodic minor. So let's talk about that now. Let's move forward. Let's inch forward a little bit. And then you'll see how it relates to the amplified circle of fifths. Now here are the 7, oh, this is very tiny, but here are the 7 scales, your major scale, and then here's your Dorian mode, Phrygian, but these all have the same tonic, all right? We are now entered into the realm of mode creation, formation, using a single tonic. In other words, single-tonic forms. In other words, the tonic remains the same. So you see here, the tonic is C, and you have your C minor scale, but this is actually a Dorian mode. This is Phrygian. This is Lydian. Now see, if you're in your mind, if you're following what I'm saying, you'll understand this. All right? That's the stuff we get from the major scale. Now we move into the modes that are melodic minor based. That's a traditional name, melodic minor. I call it the minor major because I have 2 scale phrases in here. I have a minor scale phrase and a major. It's very, very simple. It's beautiful, actually. So now you have your scales with the tonic C, the same tonic, but you have different modes. That's what I've been trying to tell you. That's too small. You might not be able to see it. But this is what we're talking about, and we're going to show how it relates to the amplified circle of fifths. That's very important. Okay, so now we finally get to this. We've shown how my mistakes led to the theoretical perfect chord, which led to, I don't know if I have my paper here, which led to all kinds of stuff. Well, anyway, it led to all kinds of stuff. And we got to the point where we discovered scale shapes. And then we inched our way forward and narrowed it down to 2 scale shapes. And we discovered that there's 2 scale shapes, basically, that exist within the realm of the modes, all right, derived from the major scale. 2 scale shapes, all right, that are affected, that are brought into life, that are realized from the modes built on or from the major scale. See, we already discussed that. So we ask, well, what happens when we start making modes based on the melodic minor, traditional melodic minor, the scale I call C minor major? Well, we get the same thing. Here's your C minor major in green, right? And this is the scale shape we get, right? We get the scale shape. Now we're just E is not included. All right, it's like a giant figure I, letter I. It's like a giant letter I. And then we have the C augmented 2 scale. All right, that's in my book. These are my names from my system. But you see, again, it's just that scale shape shifted over, right? It's just shifted over. Now, here's the same scale shape for the C major minor 2 scale, all right? But the problem is, this is the problem when I try to explain stuff. I cannot draw this scale shape, all right, this scale shape on this chart because it'll conflict. You see, it'll be so jumbled up in such a mess that you won't be able to understand it. So I just draw it separately. And also this scale shape can be drawn using the outer data rings. You get the same scale shape, a giant letter I. But the whole point is I can't fit them all on the same paper. You see, I can't fit them all on the same paper. So I have to use two different papers because look at this. You see here that this scale shape would overlap this one. It would be just a jumbled up mess. See the B flat here? It would overlap this pretty little chart that I made. It takes me forever to make these, by the way. All right, then we have another scale shape, the second one in this set. All right, and here you have your C minor 2 minor scale, named after the scale phrases. And here you have your C diminished augmented scale. And once again, all you did was you took your scale shape and you slid it over a few cells, you slid it over, and you get another mode or another scale within that melodic minor set. You see that? If you say, well, Joey, that's coincidence, it just worked out, you got lucky. No, it's almost a system. It's a fail. But I developed this while I was failing at the other stuff. Look at this. Here's your C minor augmented scale, and here's your C augmented minor. And look at that. Same thing, same scale shape. All you did was you shifted it, all right? You shifted it like this, but as you can plainly see, I cannot put all of these on one amplified circle. See, because they're going to crash into each other. You see? They're going to crash into each other. So I had to put them on two separate charts for now, just for now, until you really get to understand this. It's hard to see. I'll back off, okay? It's the same scale shape, and all we did was, like for example, this one here, if we slid this, all right, we slid that, this D flat here would be positioned here. So if I drew that on there, it would be just cluttered up, and it'd be terrible. All right, so that's how far we got. That's how far we got. That sounds a little weird, but it's really important because we see how we can identify modes and visualize those modes on the amplified circle of fifths. Just a basic plain thing. If you take the time to think it through and draw it out, you can envision the scales and the modes, and that's a beautiful thing. I hope that made a little bit of sense. It's very, very complicated, but I think it's a beautiful thing. Anyway, I'll let you decide. Thank you, and good night.